Now we finally arrived at tissue day. What I'm going to do is off camera, well, maybe I'll just run by it real quick. To run a test that I have enough dope on the flaps, little tip weight boxes and things, what I'm going to do is run the little gear covers, doors and things, and if the tissue seems to be adhering well, I know I have enough raw dope on the wood, and I'll go ahead and do the wing. But I'll do that little test. Actually, I'll do it right now and see if we have enough dope on there. Now notice we're using medium tissue. The whole job is going to be medium tissue. In fact, all the tissue on this whole plane is going to be medium. No 00. Now this has, after we sanded it back out, 3 more coats of dope. It's dried overnight. We're ready to run a little test on this and see if the tissue is going to stick, and if it is, we'll run off and tissue the whole wing. Tissue the whole house. Tissue the van. Now I like to use Windex to wet the tissue. Just tear a little piece off. This is just a test. And you'll know right away if you don't have enough dope. I put a really, really nice generous coat of dope on here. Nice wet coat. And this is now my test for if we're ready to tissue. Press it down with my hands, and if that sticks kind of good, which it is, means I've got enough dope underneath. Now if I didn't have enough dope, I'd be able to just pull that right up. And what happens, here's another thing a lot of people don't realize where you miss the boat on this sometimes. This tissue is shrinking. When you go to shrink the tissue, if it's not adhered down well, you lose all the benefit of having that drum tightness in the tissue. Actually, for a test, this looks real good. This looks like it's going to make it. Now you can see how wet I've left this. We'll let this dry and get another 3 coats of dope on this, and then I can just take a razor, just trim the little edges and holes. It'll harden right up. Even sandpaper will take it right off. Nice wet coat of dope on there. Now when you're doing flaps, a couple of good ideas here. I cut the tissue ahead of time. Make sure I have plenty of Windex in the sprayer here. One of the things you want to do when you do a flap, you want to do one side and you want to get it right over and do the other side. So one of the things that's a big help is have all your stuff ready, have the tissue ready. I like to use Windex. It evaporates faster. Notice I'm doing this on a blanket. What it does, it absorbs all the Windex except just what you need. You can kind of pat that down with a paper towel. That might help a little bit too. You just want the tissue damp, not soaking wet, dripping and drooling. Get the flap out. Get my dope out. A nice wide brush here helps. Now because we did our little test and it was successful, I feel confident we can go ahead and get as much doping as we can today done. But the trick with all doping is get started. If you do the wing, try to get the whole wing done in one session. Never do half of a wing and then, you know, go have pizza or something. Try to get a whole wing done. I want to get the hinge pockets. Get a nice, real good coat of dope on here. Don't fool around trying to get like some minimum amount thinking you're going to save weight. This dope is going to become part of the flap, and it's going to hold the tissue in place. It's going to become part of the structure. You can just pick this up, drop it right in place. If you have any wrinkles, it's not a big deal. Spread it all out. Wipe it right with your bare hands. It's not a problem. The day you do your tissue, you're probably going to have slimy, ugly hands anyway, so your wife will be hollering at you and everything for smelling like a can of paint. Debbie Borelli will be hollering at you. Anyway, the other thing you want to have is a double-edged razor. Seems to work the best. I showed that on the big opening sequence of the video for trimming, or if you don't have that, a brand new number 11 blade. As soon as it gets dope on it, it loses its ability to cut. As soon as this kind of tacks up, sets up, want to go right out and get the razor. Now if you don't decide you want to do the trimming on this right at the time, you could take this flap now, flip it over and do the other side. And when you sand it, just sand right up to the tissue that's hanging off and it'll come off. I don't know why, I guess it's an old habit, I just prefer doing it this way. But certainly there are other ways of doing this. You can do that same thing with glass cloth. Just leave the excess hanging over. And when we get to do the wing, you know, we'll only do one panel. I'm only going to do one flap side. I'll do the other one off camera, but keep in mind, I'm going to go right over and do that other flap. I'm not going to sit a half an hour waiting for it. I want to get rolling on this. Once you set the wheels in motion, now I'll put all those little cuts where the flap hinge pockets are. Tuck that right in. Trying to get this as accurate as I can. I think once you see a tissue job done with the little tricks that are available, put these little notches in, press it down. Before this even dries, get the second coat on. And then what tissue is there, you'll actually just press the hinges right through the tissue when you go to assemble a plane or do a test fit. Now whenever you do wet a flap like this and you do one side, don't let it scare you to death if this is the first time you're doing it. The flap is going to bow. It's going to bow like a banana. And that perfect piece of sea grain wood, it's going to look like a banana. Don't let it bother you. Don't get excited. That's absolutely normal. If you can see the bow in that now, when you dope the other side, that bow will go away. Before we flip this over, plenty of dope. Press it down with your bare hands or with a brush or whatever, any way you can get it to go down. Paper towels, brushes, brush the edges around. Get a coat on here. As soon as I get the first coat, I'm going to flip this right over and do the other side. The sooner the better, because you want both sides to shrink at the same time. As soon as this is dry to the touch, we'll just lay it on the table and do the other side. Okay, next step, just let that dry a minute. So it's dry to the touch, it doesn't start picking up all the dust off the table. We'll flip it over, we have the tissue ready, the Windex is ready, my big jar of root beer is ready, I'm ready. Now what I did, I got the tissue all cut off camera. I'm going to do the bottom of the wing first. Now, one of the important things, I want the tissue to go out over, in other words, where the fuselage sits on the wing, I want it to be double tissued. So I want this piece to go out into this wing panel, this one to come over here and overlap by about 3 inches right in the middle. That extra tissue gives the wing a little extra strength right in there where the fuselage is resting on it. So again, we're going to basically do the same thing. I'm only going to show one wing panel on, on the camera, is get a really, really good coat of dope. No, now this is important, and this is a question I have been asked by people wanting to pick up all these tips. At this point in time, you don't put any dope on the cap strips. You want that piece of tissue to shrink equally. You don't want that tissue to be sticking to the cap strips at this time. A nice thick coat of dope on here, all around the perimeter, all around the edge. Big word, huh? Just like I went to college. Perimeter, wow. Anyway, around the edge. You're making a picture frame. You don't get any dope on the cap strips. When you go down around the trailing edge, you'd like to get a little extra tissue down around a trailing edge. And of course the wingtips. You can go right out to the end. Now if you wind up getting some wrinkles out at the wingtip, hey, not the end of the world, believe me. But you really don't want to get any on the cap strips if you can help it. And again, we're going to do this as soon as we're finished with one panel. Flip it right over and do the other panel. Don't do left, right, do top, bottom, top, bottom. That's always, especially if you're doing this kind of a wing or an I-beam. Any kind of a wing where you want the tissue to shrink equally. I guess even on a foam wing, that's the method of choice. We're firming up this thing up at Scott Smith's. I hope it's going to be real successful. I talked to Steve Busso today. He sounds excited about participating in it, so we may be able to get, and believe me, Steve is, if not the best, one of the best, incline letraset, design, make drawings, make mud pies, eat pizza. Even though him and I have had discussions in the past that we haven't agreed 100%, he still is one of the good builders. Look at this. And he knows how to buy a pizza pie. That's the main thing. A little cheap when it comes to paying the bill at the Santa Fe Cafe, but we'll let that go for now. Now you notice, even if you get this in wrong on the first shot, not a big deal. Just pick it up. The Windex gives you plenty of flexibility. In fact, right here I want to just let that go over the bell crank bolt for now. What I want more than anything else is to have it where it goes over the open bays, have as few or no wrinkles as possible, and it takes a little fooling around here. Just stretching it from place to place. Now obviously if we put the whole tissue into the wing on a video, you know, it would run an hour or so, whatever. It'd be very long and redundant. And what we really just want to do is just give you the idea of some of the ways we do it. A lot of times John DeTavio used to tell me you steal a guy's trade with your eyes. You just watch how he does things like laying tile and roofing and construction kind of things, and you can pick up 90% of it just by watching somebody do it, even if they don't want you to learn how to do it. They're going out of their way not to show you. And, you know, I'm hoping I'm going out of my way to show you anyway. Get plenty of dope on here, plenty of dope. You get a wrinkle, it's not the end of the world. You can pick it right up. See, we got some wrinkles out here. Just kind of pull it and stretch it out. If you have to, of course, you could re-wet the tissue if it dries out. But the Windex is such a nice medium to use instead of the water. And with double tissue in the center of the wing, so we're going way out, maybe 2 inches out into the other wing. Press it right down. Looks like we got it pretty well here with very few wrinkles. Now see, this is the point at which if you didn't have enough dope on, the tissue starts shrinking and there's nothing keeping it from just shrinking up, and you don't get any tension. You lose all the tension in the tissue. And then you wind up trying to get the tension back with 10 coats of shrink dope instead of 1 or 2, and it's a problem, and then you wind up having a Dutchy pretzel instead of a wing. It pays to just soak it on here at this point in time. Let it flow. Now we'll get the other, and I'm going to try to get right through this. We'll get the other 3 panels done as soon as possible. Again, you want to do the opposite of this side. Top and bottom, top and bottom. You don't want to go left, right, left, right. That's a good tip you can use. If you have a hairdryer here, and this is because you're going to have a lot of dope on here, and you want to just hit this with a hairdryer a little bit, but don't try to dry the dope with a hairdryer. That's a mistake. A mistake I've learned the hard way. Now the tissue is starting to really lay nice and flat. I get all the wrinkles out. And just work my way around. Obviously the last thing is get the razor blade out. I like to leave double tissue on the leading and trailing edges, especially by the hinge line here. I can see all the little wrinkles coming out of the tissue now. That works so nice. Obviously another thing we always try to do, bottom first. Always do the bottom first. This way you get your technique down, your timing or whatever. Your winning lottery tickets, get everything ready. Tissue's all ready. If you have a little wrinkle, There's no cause to get nervous about it. It will sand right out. Okay. Okay. And we'll do the other 3 sides off camera, of course. Save a little tape. And then come back to this and then see how much we can get it done here today. Looks like it's going to be a real nice wing now. I just keep saying this over and over, but it really is going to be, and I hope it's going to be a nice wing.
But testosterone is what makes a man a man.
All right, I got a little session going here. No guarantee I'm going to get a whole lot done though, because to tell you a secret, my wife is bitching and moaning about the smell in the house. So I'm basically doing this without her knowing I'm down here. She thinks I'm outside. Anyway, if you have any of these problems, welcome to reality. Couple of tricks. I want to get, now there's no shrink dope on the tissue yet. This is totally dry. I want to get 3 coats of dope on here, and I want to go out onto the tissue about a 1/16 of an inch. Where I have these little hatches and covers and things, I left the tissue on. Otherwise this pulls and you don't get a nice joint right here. So until you get some dope on here and the tissue's all shrunk permanently, then cut these out. Alright, number 2, good tip. You're putting on 3 coats of clear dope. You want to go out over the edge, over about a 1/16 of an inch out onto the tissue. Now remember, the tissue right now has no dope at all on it. 0 dope. Let me show this on a macro lens. I think it'll be better. Now you see how I'm going out onto the tissue a 1/16 of an inch. Now when I do the shrink dope, and I probably do that later tomorrow, tonight, or whenever, I'll go out and I'll go out over here a 1/16 of an inch. So that where the ridge or the edge is, I have double dope overlapping. This dope goes out onto the wood, this one goes out on. Okay, that's a super important part of getting, so you don't have little rough spots, or hot spots I'll call them, where your cap strips end, and when you go to buff this out, you don't get where you buff through. It maintains a nice radius. It gives the paint a nice lay down look there. So I'll get the rest of this done off camera. 3 coats, maybe an hour or 2 apart. 3 coats of clear, and then we'll use some shrink dope to shrink up the tissue. I haven't taken the tissue out of the boxes yet. Otherwise what happens, you get a little wrinkle right in this corner, because this is putting tension against here until everything gets hard and firm and shrunken up the way it should. And again, I'm trying to get the whole wing done in one sitting here, and then hang it up to dry. Now this is an important point. All SIG colors are made from light coat. The only shrink dope that they have is the clear. So don't get yourself screwed up here thinking that all colors are shrink dope. Only the clear is shrink. Now what we're going to do is we mix this up, and I mixed it up off camera. 40% dope, 60% thinner. And I want to get, now that that's all dry on the wing, I want to get 3 coats, 3 nice coats just on the tissue, and come out onto the edges of the wood. And as I do, 1 bay at a time, it's important. It's going to stick to the cap strips, which already have dope on them underneath and dry. So you want to do 1 bay at a time, stop. Go to the next bay, stop. Because as it does, it's going to start shrink, relaxing tension. You want to flip it over and do the other side right away. I got to be careful. I think Karen figured out that I'm down the cellar here. She smells the dope. Anyway, shrink dope. Try to hold this up 1 bay at a time and go right out onto the wood a little bit. Make sure you mark the jar that you have shrink dope in it, because if you go back and use this for clear, especially on a foam wing plane, you'll ruin the plane. This stuff never stops shrinking. Now what we're going to do is put 2 coats on, and then do a little test to see if this is like as tight as we'd like to see it. We want to go out onto the wood, but I sure don't want to go out over the leading edge any more than I have to. If you ever see these planes where the leading edge looks like a starving horse, well, one of the reasons that can happen is because you basically have the dope shrinking up there. Remember, it's only Sig Clear, not light coat, but Sig Clear. That's a shrink dope. Everything else is made from light coat, all of their colors. And I'll just go one bay at a time here. Give it an hour or so to dry. Put a second coat on, and put the shrink dope away. Get it out of your shop. Kiss it goodbye, kiss it goodnight, kiss Midgley, whatever. Get it out, because if you put shrink dope... Now, a true story, Lou Dudka, Bill Simons, when he flew up here, he ran out of light coat one time, and he mixed half light coat and half shrink dope and sprayed the clear on a foam wing plane called the Rogue. And it kind of worked halfway decent. But what happened to him, he told Lou Dudka about it. Lou Dudka figured, aha, more must be better. He ordered up a gallon of shrink dope and sprayed his whole matrix with shrink dope. Well, within a month, the ink lines had bows in them. It warped up so bad that for all intents and purposes, the plane was ruined. It buffed out real nice, but it ruined the plane. So this shrink dope will buff out a little bit nicer than light coat. Light coat's a little bit of a job. Oh, the wife knows I'm down here. I have to shut the video off. All right, I'll be right up, honey. I feel like a man that just got caught cheating on his wife. Anyway, I'm going to finish this up real quick. And we'll come back, put a coat on an hour from now. And then put it aside to dry. This is the best part of the day, just knowing it's all sitting over there drying. Let it dry. Now, there's a lot of ways, how can I put this simply? There's a lot of ways you can luck out in life, and we lucked out over this weekend. What happened is, I finally got all the tissue on the plane, got as much of the dope on there as I could get, and I needed a couple days to let it harden up. Well, my God, it's raining so hard out there now. It's a good day to let it sit, good day to just let it harden up. Got to tell you a couple of funny things. We did get the World Champion video, and by the way, that's part of it playing in the background. It's a great video. All the subscribers, of course, will get a copy. If you're not a subscriber, maybe you want a copy anyway. Beside the point, a lot of good information you can learn from that video. I made some notes that I thought were pertinent, and I don't want to go into detail because this isn't the World Champion video, but I am going to make up a little thing that I'm going to send out with all the videos with my comments and my feelings. On a lighter note, on a funnier note, I know Borelli's going to love this, and Peggy Ortiz. Check this out. This was Saturday night. My wife, a couple of girls she works with and their husbands, we went to a Mrs. T's Pierogi's Jimmy Stir Christmas concert. It was a polka concert. It was the funniest thing. It was a lot of fun. Really had a ball. And the good part about it is my wife bought the tape. So she doesn't know that I know, but she's gonna give it to me for Christmas. So we're gonna have polka music on future tapes. I can see you're all excited about that. And we also got, and I'm gonna include these, one with each World Championship video. These are coupons for Mrs. T's Pierogies, and they have Mexican pierogies. So I'm gonna be getting, if you get some coupons with your next video, cash them in. These pierogies are good. The concert was good. The World Champion videos are gonna go out today. They'll take precedent over the rest of these subscriber tapes. I want to get them out and get them in the mail. Derek did an awesome job, and I'm sure he'd appreciate if every person out there would sit down and write a little thank you note to him. He put a lot of effort and a lot of his own money and time, and needless to say, I got to mention this on the tape too. You may think this tape is overpriced. When you see how many hours Carlos, Mariano, and I put into converting this from Chinese PAL to Australian PAL, and then from Australian PAL back to USA format, holy mackerel, you can't believe, this was 9 hours for 3 men just to do the conversion, and Derek didn't record the sound on, he split the sound on some tracks and didn't split it on other tracks. I don't know why. I'm going to holler at him, I'm going to ass whip him, whatever. But we managed to get all the sound and all the commentary and all the footage and the winning flight. And believe me, if the winner, if anybody tells you the winner didn't win that contest, eat your heart out. That Chinese guy, that 60 was humming, just puttering along, and boy, I'll tell you, the only comment I don't agree with Derek on, and I wrote him a letter saying so, is that these Chinese are professionals. I think that's the biggest crock of shit in the world. Ted Fancher, myself, Paul Walker, and Jimmy Casale, and whoever, Werwich, we fly more than these guys can fly. I challenge anybody on the planet to fly more fuel than I fly. And the biggest asset is knowing Big Jim. These Chinese guys don't know Big Jim. If they knew Big Jim, gee, they'd be unbeatable. You know, that's an important point. Really important point to pick off the video. Regardless, the wing is going to sit for the rest of the day. I'm not going to work on the wing because I know it's only been sitting a few days. I'm going to wait another day. And what I'll do is I'll sand it out. I'll try to get some of the sanding on video. As I'm doing it, I'm constantly watching the World Championships over and over to see if I can pick up some of the things that would be significant for me. Now, because these people are using 60s, their motor runs are very similar to mine. You'll notice they use barrel mufflers very similar to Art Adamison's muffler. They don't use pipes at all. Most of the people there, 58%, were using 60s. The World Championships are usually won characteristically in the past by Les McDonald and Bill Werwich and Bob Gieske and even Hunt, flying smooth patterns, not jump jet stunt darting all over the sky with awesome corners, but every third bottom missed. You look at the bottoms this Chinese guy had, however you say his name, try to convince yourself. Look at his triangles, and then look at some of our triangles, and see if geometry is geometry or if bullshit is bullshit. Anyway, you'll all be getting a copy of the tape. You'll probably have the tape before you get this commentary. And don't forget the pierogi coupons. This is important. So we're going to come back to this wing tomorrow and hopefully get some sanding done. Well, good morning, and this is Monday. We're going to have our class tonight. What I'm going to try to do, no wonder it's dark in here. I didn't put the light on yet. One of the things I got to try to do now is do a test on this. This has been drying for a few days. Take out some 320 paper, a little block, or a soft block. It really doesn't matter here. And take your little parts. Remember, if you've watched any of the other construction sets, you can radius all the edges no matter what. Even if it's not dry, that'll be okay. Radius all the edges, always an important thing. And try to get a little feel for if this dope is dry yet. Now, there's really about 3 good coats of light coat on the wood over the tissue, 3 coats under the tissue, and then we have the shrink dope on the tissue. Now, what happens is this stuff is all fuzzy. What happens all the time is you want to sand right down until you actually can feel some of the tissue fibers, but you don't want to sand down through into the wood and tear. In other words, the ideal thing is to sand just before you go through the tissue. And that's what I'm going to do right now. And the idea of that is to minimize how much finish stays on top of the tissue. I'd like to see just a few grains of tissue coming through right now. And I always experiment on my little parts. These little parts are the things that save your life. Another good thing is if you spend the whole day doing flaps and boxes and cowlings or whatever, the wing itself gets an extra day to dry out. And because that wing has been sitting by a heating vent, I hope it's going to be dry today. Then once this is sanded out, from this point on, we'll be using filler coat. We'll mix up some more filler coat. Try to get a coat of, maybe even get a coat of filler on today. I'd really like to get a coat of filler on today. That'd be real nice. But I just can feel the tissue coming through. It's smooth, it's velvety. Feels like a clean t-shirt that just came out of the laundry. I got my other little boxes. Again, all the radius is done. And I'll do the flaps. I'll do a lot of this off camera. And I also want to get in here on the flaps with the hinge slotting tool again. Each time I do this, and I get my corners real nice. Get in there. See, they're built up. A little bit of dope is built up in there. I got to kind of work it in. Just try to keep, I like to see the corners in there nice and sharp. But again, this is one of these points. Now, a lot of people, I know people that go right out right now, don't sand this down and go right out and put the filler on. But then what happens when you go to sand the filler, you're sanding this, This is like a little hills and valleys. The fillers in hills and valleys. Oh, by the time you're done, you've got a nightmare. Sanding this, you saw how long it took me to sand this out? This should be 15 minutes of flap surface, 5 minutes a catch area, and maybe an hour, hour and a half for each wing panel, and then maybe detailing out the tissue. Not an all-day job. I'm going to try to get some of this done today. Maybe even get some of the filler on today, I hope. And most of all, the most important thing, have a big cup of Karen's coffee. I think she put Zambuca in this coffee to keep me awake in the morning. Here's that little box. I don't know if you can see this up on a macro lens, just how it gets velvety. We're actually down into where you see little pieces of tissue sticking up. And you can feel that is nice and smooth now. That's ready for filler. So this dope looks apparently like it's going to be dry enough to sand. We'll get into sanding some of the other parts. Now it looks like this dope really did harden up nice. This is sanding out real nice. The test always, if the dope needs more drying times, if you get those little balls on the sandpaper, little chewing gum balls. Again, this is 320 to gray paper. And one of the steps, boy, I say it over and over, but radius all the edges. In the final finish, you'll buff the plane out. You won't see those ugly buff through spots. Anything you're going to see, radius the edges. Now these little things have told me I can move right on to the flaps. And the flaps, I should be able to sand that flap out no problem at all. And then I'll go on last of all, get on to sanding out that wing. Again, this is the kind of thing, just takes time. We're just going to have to sit here, spend some time. We'll probably run right up until our class starts tonight. It's a Monday night. Try to get, maybe even get the filler on tonight. Although I don't like to rush it. I like to get as much done as I can without getting into that mode where I'm trying to finish it. It's not even Christmas yet and this wing is in filler already. So there's really no rush, that's for sure. Now I just want to show on the video, I hit the first spot on the first flap. See this little ball of gum here? Trying to sand the hinge line out, and what it is, it's not on the flap itself, it's in the hinge line. That there's little gummy bears, I'll call them. Anyway, I'll try to get this flap. All right, let's get a little close up. This side is sanded. See if we can zero in with the macro lens. See where I'm picking it up is around. That's why I go in with the hinge pocket tool. You can see I'm almost sanded through here. Let's get a look if I've here. Now you can see here's a spot. I'm through the tissue. That's it. I can't sand anymore. Got to go put some filler on it. I'm starting to tear the tissue away. It's already sanded enough now. There's a hair here. Well, I haven't sanded this side yet. That'll come right out with the sandpaper. This is about right. This is about right. This is the side that's really nice. Smooth, velvety, nice and even. And right up around here, what I'm going to do is run this. See the tissue starting to delaminate here? What I'm going to do is run this on the straight edge, try to true that edge up all at once. Later on I'll do that. But that's the test. When you see those little chewing gum gummy bear balls on the sandpaper, you know, you could let this dry more, or you're going to have to start changing the sandpaper on a regular basis. Now I have this flap all sanded out, and I don't know, you probably even can hear it. Hear the difference? You can even hear the difference. Anyway, some of the things I did. I wrapped this edge with my machinist ruler with 320 to break that edge. This one, of course, we still have to do. I just wanted to show how this started to shape up. Any spots that I've come through, I'll just put a little extra filler on there. They'll disappear. And I'm trying to keep all the corners sharp. That's one of my goals here. And I cleaned this pocket out where the wire for the horn is going to go in. So what I'll do the other one off camera, and I want to true this edge up. I want to true the whole hinge line edge up next. And then basically just do the other one off camera. I'm just trying to see that I'm picking up all the high spots here. I don't want to make a flat spot, just that I get them even. Can dress this edge just a little bit. Let's see if we can pick up any high spots this way. Like to keep that trailing edge and hinge line as nice as possible. It's a good idea to constantly sight down and make sure you're not picking up some kind of giant warp either on this. Okay, the other one I'll do off camera. We'll come back to this when they're done. Now we got the flaps all sanded out. Here's another, just a reminder here. We had the filler that we had mixed up for the tail. It's all settled down to the bottom. Now what I've done is I want to shake this all up, get all the talc off the bottom. When that's all off the bottom, then I'm going to look at my watch, let it sit for 5 minutes, and then just work off the top of the jar. First coat of filler. Now what I'm going to try to do, especially on the flaps, and this is a good trick you can use on big flat areas, especially if you use a foam wing, is try to brush one coat of filler on span-wise, let it dry, second coat of filler this way, third coat of filler on a 45-degree angle. Maybe an hour apart on the filler coats. There's going to be no filler on the open bays of the wing. This filler will only be on wood areas. Now what I'm doing now is on the flaps and on the little boxes and stuff, I'm testing the consistency of the filler. Even though I've used it before, some of the clear evaporates or whatever, I want to make sure it doesn't either need a little thinner or a little extra clear. So I do my little test on the flaps. While that's drying, I can be working sanding out the wing. Now there's a lot of good information on just looking at this flap. You can see the little spots where the tissue is coming through. This is the first coat. It's still tacky wet. I put it on with the brush strokes front to back. Now this is going to sit and dry for an hour. While it's drying, I can be working on other projects. And I'll do the other putting the filler on the next coat. I'll put front to back and then on a 45-degree angle, side to side. But a lot of information here. It tells me I got a good amount of substrate on here. Probably the 3 coats of filler will be all I need. Once it's sanded out, we can go right into silver. This looks like it's going to be just fine. A lot of good information here if you just look at it. Now, if you were to put this coat on and you see the whole thing was perfectly shiny and you had no dry spots, what it means is you put too much paint on. And you may as well get in there and sand it off, or you're going to have a 9 or 12 or 15 or who knows what ounce finish. So I'm going to do the rest of the flap, the boxes off camera, and then pick this up when we start working on the wing. Okay, we got all 3 coats of filler on these guys. They're sitting there drying, sitting with the heating vent wide open. We got the vent, where's the vent? Wide open here, blowing some heat on this stuff. Tail's still cooking away. We'll be getting back to that soon. Cranking away. But right now, the thing of choice, I want to try to get some of the wing work done. It's Monday, and really want to get on to maybe getting some of this wing and filler today. So I'll get ready to sand this all puppy out. Cut these little extra pieces of tissue out now. Get it sanded out with some 320 in a block and start getting the filler on it. Now, I've just been checking out this wing. The reason I want to get this tissue out of here now, we've left it on to keep the contour, as close to perfect as possible. So we want to start getting the radiuses. Remember that old thing, radius edges. Radius edges. I know I say that over and over again, but boy, that's an important part of front row planes. Radius, neat edges. Anyway, now one of the things we're never going to do is never get filler coat with talc on the open bays. Only clear goes on the open bays. Also, at this point in time, I want to take a little look down here and see how this is coming out. This looks straight, real straight, hasn't moved at all. But if it was to start to move, you could start to, just supposing it was twisted up, you could start to flex it back or let it sit in a position where there'd be some tension in the opposite way. Normally, D-tube wings, C-tube wings, they stay straight. Once you get the rods out, you're really in pretty good shape from that point on. Now I'll do most of this with a block, either a foam block or a solid block, and some 320. Again, won't do most of it on camera, just dress it all off and get right up to the edges. I'm not going to do anything over here other than just dress it off by hand just a little bit. Don't try to sand these cap strips with a block anymore. The closest you're going to be able to get with a block is right up on the edge. Then the edge itself you're going to have to do by hand with a little, just a tiny piece of sandpaper. This needs very little work now, very little work just to get the grain flattened out. Most of the work I'll do will be on the raw wood areas here. And then hopefully get a coat of filler, or a couple coats of filler on this today. Now as always, we'll always do the bottom first. Get a fresh piece of sandpaper. Work right up to that edge, but not out over onto the open bays. And you can pick up any rough spots here real quick. Now in the center of this, where the double tissue is, we could be a little more aggressive. We might even be able to use some 220 there. Go right around the bell crank bolt. All the edges, radius all the edges. Try to do as much of it as you can with a block. And right up here, we can try to get that double tissue blended right in. Now everywhere we have a hatch, of course, we want to get the edges radiused. Gold machinist ruler, just like we've done in the past. Don't want to have sharp edges anywhere. That radiused edge is so important. The technique we're using, as soon as we're done with the block, we have everything on this side done with the block, then I'll take a piece of worn out sandpaper and get right up on the edges. Now it's real easy to go through, so you just want to touch them before we get that filler coat on there, that first coat of filler. There's still not a lot of dope. As soon as you see the tissue coming through, bingo, you're done. You can go over everything now with a piece of sandpaper open coated. Bare hand. Try to go up around the joint where the two pieces of sandpaper meet once or twice. We should be ready soon for some filler. Now, of course, in by the lead outs, where the lead outs are coming out, we want to really radius those edges and get all the dope and chewing gum and gummy bears and who the hell knows what else is hiding in there. And this is one of the times you can just add a little radius to every edge. And all these edges are going to show. Every time you can get a radius on here, it's one less thing that you're going to be buffing through or waxing through, or hopefully if the plane becomes one of those planes you keep for 10 years and 3,000 flights, it'll already be radiused and cleaned up. Now I let that filler decant 5 minutes. What I'm going to do is try to get one coat of filler on a wing, let it dry roughly an hour. I have some other things to do in the meantime. Now I'm going out onto the tissue, if you notice, just a little bit. Maybe 1/8 of an inch on each brush stroke out onto the tissue. Try not to get any big globs or runs or whatever. And it's best if you really can do this without going back and forth with the brush. Then I'll need a striping brush to go over the cap strips, but I really don't want to get any filler, or I want to get the minimum amount out on the tissue. Just out that first little bit is just plenty. It takes a little time, because don't forget, you want to get the brush strokes all going in a different direction. It just saves you some sanding. Same thing back in. Now the next coat I put on here, I'll get the brush strokes going in the other direction, and then the last coat on a 45-degree angle. Let me show this up close. Now while it's wet, you can see I've gone out onto the tissue, maybe 1/8 of an inch. Now when I put the clear, I'll let the filler dry the first coat, then I'll put some light coat on here, but go out onto the wood, so that I'm always overlapping over these joints. And I'll do the ribs, of course, with a striping brush. Now I'm just going down each bay. I want to go down each cap strip, but I don't want to get out onto the silk span more than maybe 1/16 or 1/8 of an inch. Striping brush is the tool of choice here. Any brush with long hair, I call them striping brushes. And you want to try to pull a dope through in one shot like this, so you don't have to go back over it and leave brush marks. And we'll try to get a couple of coats each time we do filler. We want to put 3 coats of filler on before we sand it. This is nice thin filler. You can see it doesn't leave brush marks. And just go right over them, one right after another. The hot tip here. Minimum of an hour to dry in between coats. And you can either do it either before, after, or during, it doesn't matter, but we're going to try to get light coat now. We've got enough shrink dope on hand, a light coat back out over the bays. So you may as well, actually if we had time right now, we could put the light coat right on top of the filler here. Just let the filler kick off 5-10 minutes. Soften up the tissue. Now we also can take the striping brush while we have it, do edges, corners, anything that needs a little bit extra. Okay, we'll get the rest of this done off camera. No sense wasting, just go redundantly here. 3 coats of filler on everything, and maybe 3 coats of light coat over the raw tissue. Now all our parts are sitting over here drying. We're going to give this another day to dry before we actually work on it. We'll come back here either later today or tomorrow and work on it. So filler always just seems to be so much easier to sand out the next day. Give it an extra day and it's a good investment. Now if you remember back on Tsunami was one of those planes that we just never got the exhaust stacks right on. I made some stacks. This is a letter that Joe Adamusco wrote me, and he's got some detailed things of how he actually made these up. And some of these nice pieces of bent tubing and some flared tubing. And some of the little stacks, I want to get in on this. He made this 2 different ways. Because a real Griffin engine, which is what we're trying to do, has a little bell out at the end. And because these are aluminum now, of course you could split the hardwood. But he made these 2 separate ways. These have a curve and these are straight, but still with the bell end. And we'll be working more on this. This is a future project, but this is one of these things I like to toy around with while I'm waiting for the filler to dry. Always find some other little projects. He left me a detailed note of how he wound up doing this. And of course there'll be more on this on future videos. And of course we could also, if we could find out where to buy this tubing, John Byrne was the one that supplied these, then we could go back and retrofit Tsunami with this too. So we'll find out. More on this to come. Now today we want to do a little test. I want to see how this filler has dried up. We had a real good Monday night class. We didn't shoot any video. Basically it was just so busy and hectic. So many things going on here at once. Anyway, just to bring you up to date, Jimmy's little, what do you call it, Fierce Arrow is for all purposes finished. And he's ready to assemble a pattern master, so maybe later this week we'll get an afternoon or an evening. We could do his pattern master on a nice glass table. I want to sand the filler. This is an important test. I want to sand the filler, just block it out just a little bit. Basically what I'm trying to determine is, do I need another coat of filler or is this enough? Now if I need another coat, well, we'll try to get it on today. Today looks like a day that we could be maybe even doing some of this painting outside. It's not so cold, instead of stinking up the house. Sand one little piece off. Now what I'll do with this, I'll go outside and I'll spray this silver. And if this looks real good, well hey, I got it made. Now I know the rest of it is more or less hopefully going to be okay. But if this looks all grainy and dry spots appear, you know I'm not going to do. You know I'm going to need more, another coat of filler. Another choice you have, if it looks grainy, let it dry, spray a coat of clear and another coat of silver. Then let that dry and use the silver as the first coat of filler. Now, one of the most, I guess, difficult things to try to explain to people over the phone or in letters is how much substrate goes on a plane. I think most people put too much, myself included, and most people don't sand enough. It's better to put more on and sand it off than it is to try to do this in one or two sandings and then in the final coats you see scratches and imperfections and things. When you spray that first coat of silver on, it's really got to be close to perfect anyway. So now what you have is we have 5 little pieces, 2 gear doors, 2 flaps to practice our silver with. I'll sand the rest of this off. Block sand it with 320. You don't want to get anything heavier than 320 onto this now because it's going to make sanding scratches. From this point in the finish on, you want to hopefully go 300, 320, 400. You don't want to get anything with deeper sanding scratches. And what we're going to try to do is, I'll get all this sanded off, I'll set up the compressor to spray a coat of silver and see how it looks. The last thing I'll do is the wing, and I'll know by how this comes out if the wing is ready for silver. If it's not, if it's still a little on the dry side, then especially on the top of the wing, I'll put another coat of filler. Wait a day and sand it off. But constantly doing these little tests. Once you know exactly how much to put on, and the test is when you spray silver, it should look just a little bit dry. You sand it off, you put the second coat of silver, a couple little spots, and a third coat or second coat should be perfect. If you spray the first coat of silver on that's perfect, what it means is you probably have too much substrate on the plane. You probably have an ounce or 2 of extra paint that's going along for the ride. So, getting this right amount of substrate on a plane is so important. It's a thing I like to show over and over on the video and try to, it's information I hope you could pick up through the video for the people that can't actually be in the shop, and you can go, oh yeah, that's the right amount, or bring a plane over, yeah, that's the right amount. Well, like Jimmy, when Jimmy brought his plane over, it had way too much paint on it. We wound up sanding a third of the paint off. It's okay to put too much on, as long as you know enough to sand it off. And knowing what this should look like when you spray the silver. So important. Now what I did here, this one is already sanded out, ready for the silver test. This one isn't sanded out. And you can even feel the difference. This is like 600 paper. See if you can hear it. There's almost a difference in the sound. You could almost do it if you were blind. Anyway, this is really velvety smooth now, and this is really ready for the silver test. Now what I want to do, I want to sand this one flap side out and then get it up on a macro lens so you can see just about how much filler to be leaving on here. And I've also seen up at that end, there's some dry spots. So this will be a good indicator that you can pick up some good information from. You certainly don't want to sand all the filler off. You want to leave it on so it looks like a little mottled effect. Let's try to macro lens this up. Okay, this much of the filler is sanded off here. And you can see up here we're ready to go back up and sand it. Now as I move this down, Let's go up to this end. I see I have a dry spot. You can see around here. This is, see the, right in here, this is going to wind up needing another coat of filler. So I may as well sand the whole thing out, knowing ahead of time I'm going to need another coat of filler on this. Just a little bit rough and dry here. And what I'll try to do is get this all sanded down, probably, and just put another coat of filler on the whole flap. I don't know if I can, how close I can get on the lens here that you can see this. It just isn't perfectly smooth. You can see it's just a little bit rough here. And knowing this is really going to be a help to you, because there's no point putting filler on if you don't need it. And there's no point, you know, doubling and tripling up your work, but there's no point doing this whole job, building a whole plane, and then cheating yourself out of a nice finish so that you save one sand out. Okay, now this is the side I wanted to show. We got a couple. See this little indentation here? This is a little low spot. The spots that come out dark, you can identify right away as you're going to need another coat of. We're going to put a coat of filler on the whole thing anyway. But right here, it looks a little less than perfect. Up here, there's a couple of lines. I don't know if you can see these lines. Now, what causes these lines? These are sanding scratches. When we were sanding the wood, probably a little piece of junk got caught in there. You can see this. They'll fill in with filler. You just have to be aware of them anyway. Okay, there's one that's sanded, one side that's sanded, and one that isn't, just so you can get a comparison. If you were here in person, you could feel. That's about like 600 paper. This is about like, you know, a baby's behind. Like Midgley's behind. Anyway, that's probably one of the most important things, is just knowing when the substrate is right and when you can go on to silver. Now the whole flap sanded out, and you can see there's 4 or 5 bad spots. I'll call them bad spots up here that I want to go over. There's a dry spot down here. So there's only one choice here. It's easier to put a coat of filler on than to do a coat of talc right now. So what I'm going to do, and I'll try to get that last coat on with the brush marks going front to back, because you basically sand this way. So you always try to get the brush marks going exactly opposite of the way that you're going to do the sanding. That'll save you a little time. I'll get this coat on so it doesn't look like we're going to get to spray any silver today, because of course this will dry at least a minimum of overnight. But don't be afraid to put it on. If it needs it, put an extra coat on. Now before we even sand this out, I can tell you just before we we can go to the next coat, we're going to need another coat of filler, so that's okay. I'm probably going to put a second coat on everything. Right up here, let's get in here. This is one of the things you'll always have, okay, is these dry spots, little pock marks or whatever. This is where we've gone down into the tissue, and the tissue little threads are hanging up through the paint. And just try to pick up all the flaws here. Here's a dry spot. Okay, let's go back over here. Usually you'll have a dry spot where the two tissues, let's see if we can, where the tissue joints, because don't forget we have double tissue in the middle that makes that center nice and rigid. Otherwise you have punky wood. Here's the joint here, and we're going to start blending that joint in little by little with the 320 paper. Take a look at the bottom. Dry spot right here, if I remember right. Yeah. So we notice basically the whole thing's going to need another coat of filler, and for sure it needs more clear on the tissue. So what we're going to do, we'll sand the whole thing out, get it all sanded out nice and smooth, get another coat of filler on here and another coat of clear on the tissue, maybe 2 coats of clear on the tissue, and very lightly do the cap strips. Now don't try to sand through it. The paper rips right at the edge. I'm sure everybody has seen that. You really, until you get a lot of paint on those cap strips, and before we really do any sanding, we're going to take each open bay, go around it with a striping brush. Maybe at the end of putting the filler on, we'll brush on 2 or 3 coats of filler around here, or 2 or 3 coats of clear, before we do any real sanding on those edges. Okay, now I have the whole one side, and you can get a comparison of this side still has to be sanded, but there's a couple little tips I'd like to put on here. Now what I do, I sand the trailing edge here, but I don't go up right to the last little piece. And now I'm going to take my small block and I'm going to go right up just a little bit out over onto the cap strips, ever so little. Now you don't want to go down until until you're down to bare wood here or anything. You can see up here we have some dry spots that, well, let's just look at what we got. What I'm trying to do here with the block, I want to even out these joints so you can't feel where the cap strip ends and the sheeting begins. And just, it's such a delicate thing. You can see we're closing in on having this line. You close your eyes and this is for all purposes gone. But when we put the filler on, we'll put an extra stripe of filler over that. Tips are all sanded out. And just getting a block right up into this corner, just the least little bit on the cap strips, and then we'll be able to flip this over and get the other side done. And just the slightest little bit of sanding, just till we can't feel a joint. I'll go to each one. But you certainly don't want to go grinding away at this, trying to grind it down level. Just the slightest little bit. And of course up the other end too. Just doing the corners here now, not trying to go up onto the cap strips. Just the corners so I get these joints that you can't feel them. And we'll put a lot more filler on there when we do the edges. This will just give us that we can pick out the high spots. Now I just have a piece of worn out sandpaper. I'm just giving this the slightest little kiss here to pick out the high spots after I took care of all the corners, right down the wing. And I'll flip this over, do the other side of the wing, and then start putting some more filler on here. We're definitely going to need one or maybe two more coats of filler, and definitely need a lot more on the open bays. Anyway, one of the things I did, and I've been doing the last couple days, we had our Monday night session, and basically we spent half of the time looking at the World Championship videos and critiquing, and there's absolutely nobody, I have not run into the first person yet, of about 15 people that have shared the video with me to think anybody really won, except the guy that won. And so what I did today, I'm playing this video on the, this is the '88 World Championships, and I want to put the winning flight from China and the winning flight from Kiev back to back, just to compare the similarities in the motor run, the pattern, the sizes, the shapes, and maybe there's something to be learned there. Certainly the Chinese know how to run a motor, boy. They gave us a flying lesson there, that's for sure. But we'll get them. Trust me, we'll get them. Now with all the sanding done, I want to make sure when I put this filler on, I go out over the tissue. And we're trying to build that edge up. Everywhere there's an edge here, I gotta get back out in the light here. Everywhere there's an edge, I want to go out onto the tissue as far as I possibly can. Now you don't want to go back and wipe the dope over and over again. That's another problem. Or just get it on and walk away. If you go back over the loose dope, it just tears it all up and makes chewing gum, which I just did here on the tip. Put it on, and what I'm going to try to do is, for most of this, get nice stripes front to back. Again, one of the techniques I'm trying to take advantage of here is that it saves some of the sanding when you can get the brush strokes on front to back. Now, somebody might be thinking out there, and other people obviously have other techniques. A couple of the things I've tried that haven't worked, I've tried spraying on filler. Well, you got to spray so much, and so much thinner goes down into the wing, you usually wind up either warping the wing or not having some other part of it satisfactory. Like with all that thinner from spraying filler, you usually wind up, you need 10 coats instead of 3 or 4. And usually what will happen is the thinner will take a week to gas off instead of a day or two. So the brush, the thing you save is you don't wind up burying a lot of thinner in the substrate. And if you just use a nice camel hair brush, a 1-inch brush. Another thing too about brushes, you can't use old dried up, slimed up, and I see people, boy, I go to their shop and they're using brushes that are 100 years old. Not a good idea. Spring for a brush. Tell your wife get you one for Christmas. Use some of those pierogi coupons that Midgley gives out. Alright, we're just going to do the rest of this off camera. Now I'm going to put on 3 more coats of clear. This is light coat, of course, and I'm going out over the tissue bays. I want to get the brush marks all side to side because it's easier to sand the bays from front to back. And I want to draw this out with as few brush marks as possible. I'm doing about 3 bays at once. It seems to be about right. Just go back in, lightly draw out the paint. 2 or 3 bays seems like the right amount. Now in this part, this is one of the areas you want to be careful about how you mix the paint. If it's too thin, you're going to need 1,000 coats. If it's too thick, you're not going to get good adhesion. Now this is about 60-40 here. And light coat, needless to say. Now if you put more than 2 or 3 coats of shrink dope on, you might or might not have a problem with warping, and you might have a problem with the silk span ripping somewhere down the line when that stretches out. Shrink dope is a very, very powerful thing. Anyway, I'm going to get, again, I'll try to get an hour or so between coats here. I got an awful lot of work to do in the shop today. So I'll try to get 1 coat on, come back to this in about an hour, put the 2nd coat on, maybe the 3rd coat. Get 3 on today and give it a day or 2 to dry before we work on this again. And again, I'm going out over onto the wood by about 1/4 of an inch. Now, I hope this is going to be the last coat of filler. I took these little pieces just to see how they're going to sand out. This looks like this is the one we really had a problem with when we put extra filler on here. I'm going to sand all this down, back down with a block, and try to get, and we're in a spell of good weather here, believe it or not, try to get a little bit of silver on this and see just how much substrate more we're going to need, and we may have enough. The wing's been drying. The wing was looking great, in fact. Midgley will be all envious. Anyway, with this, as soon as we get one of these in silver, we'll know right away if we have enough filler, too much, not enough, or whatever. So I'm going to basically do the rest of this off camera and try to get some silver sprayed today. I want to run this little test on the flap. Take a little piece of wire to hold the flap, use your thumb. This is the way I've been doing it anyway. we don't have to worry about putting on a light coat here because we're obviously going to sand this coat off. We're just going right over the filler and everything with a coat of silver. Nice thick coat. Give this a couple days to dry and we'll sand it off. Notice I'm getting right around the edges. Give that an extra shot, the cap strips. Leading edge gets an extra shot. Looks like I got a bug in there. You deserve it, you little bastard. In my flame. Anyway, you try to get a little extra on the cap strips, a little extra around the edges. When this dries, we'll wet sand this whole thing out with 600. Get it down to where it's bright and shiny, and then put a paper thin coat of silver on. This is actually going to be a coat of filler. So we're really not even trying to be too careful about putting it on. Just get it on. You can still see some dry spots. Even through this filler I can see some dry spots. And when you see a dry spot like I do out here, just hit it. Give it an extra shot. I got the flaps drying over here, and it looks like they're going to be just fine. Be ready for sanding out either tomorrow or the next day. Now one of the things, the wing's over here. Let me show that. The wing is up here, just sitting by the heating vent, drying its a little silver up. Just dry away, baby. Now one of the things that's nice, because we have the tail in silver, now if we really run out of things to do here, we can get the final coat. And I just need to go around this and touch up little spots. And maybe or maybe not give it the last coat. I don't know, maybe it's got enough on it now. But what I have now is things that are drying in different sequences. So one will be drying, I could be working on the other one. I really don't lose a lot of time this way. That's one of the nice benefits. So, alright, we're going to put this away for today. Look at that wing. Ooh, silver wing. I love it. This is like a watershed time. I love this time when it just becomes an aeroplane. Now we'll do a little test this morning, sand out the flap, the little tip boxes, and see if this wing is going to be ready. We hope it is, and if not, it's not ready to be sanded. We'll let it sit another day or so. We expect Jim Damarella to stop by today, and Midgley too, so with his boss at work, so should have an interesting day. Right, before I start sanding this silver, one of the things I do, I put as many blankets on the table as possible. I got all my blankets, and an old towel that probably will go either in the garbage or in a wash when this is done. So the idea being I have a nice soft pad to work off and something that can take all the dirt and grit that we're going to make while we're sanding off this silver. Now, for anybody that doesn't know, this is the new can. I don't know which is the new can and the old can, but I went to buy seconds and it came in a different can. But the number 6040 is the item number. Oh, this must be who the hell knows? Some EPA friendly stuff here. Who knows? Anyway, and the plastic bottle, the atomizer. And for anybody that doesn't know, you buy this in a body shop supply house, get an atomizer bottle, and probably some 400 or 600 paper, depending on how rough this is going to be to take off. Hey, get a little look at, maybe we can get this on the macro lens here, how this looks. This is ready, and by the rough texture of it, I can see this is going to need at least one more sanding and another spraying of silver. Of course, we anticipate that. So I guess we're going to go with 600 on this guy. Start sanding some of these down. Get an idea of the wing. Probably will need at least 2 more coats. The wing looked even drier than this. You can get a feel. See, you can still see little grain in here. Little edges, corners, things that need to be dressed off. But this is why you run a little test. This is the sandpaper we'll be using. Obviously you buy this in a body shop supply. Wet or dry, Triamite, 3M 600. We'll cut up about 3 or 4 sheets. I like to cut the sandpaper up into 6 sheets. Each piece cut into 3s the long way and then cut it in half. That's just about the right size. Then get whatever sanding block is the appropriate size that you're going to use. Now, the things that'll make sanding the silver as easy as possible. Keep the part wet, keep the sandpaper wet, and constantly wipe off the grit, the little silver grit that forms when you do this. Now be aware, if you try doing this with rougher sandpaper, for instance 320 or 400, you get deeper sanding scratches and it gets harder and harder to get that nice smooth finish. So at some point in time you want to pay the price, and right now is a good time to do it with the 600. Even during this phase you want to constantly get those little radius and edges. Everywhere there's a sharp edge, even in the bolt, that little arrow shaft bolt. Now Tom Dixon has told me that he's used windshield wiper fluid and it's cheaper than M600. I haven't tried that yet. The few times I've tried it, it's not been a fair test. But if Dan Morrell has some windshield wiper fluid in his van, maybe I'll try it this afternoon. He usually carries some in the back of his van. Alright, this piece now is our test. And all this is going to tell us is if the amount of time we've let this dry is sufficient. The way we're going to tell is nothing is balling up on the sandpaper. Sandpaper is nice and clean. So that usually will tell us this part will be ready to sand. Now the telltale sign is if the sandpaper was getting all balled up with gummy bears and chewing gum, we'd have to let it dry another day. The way this looks now, we should be able to sand at least the little parts and maybe the flaps, who knows, but it looks like we're on the right track and we're real close. Just looking at this, I can tell, well, at least in my opinion, this looks like we're really on the right track here. The silver is dry and it's coming off relatively easily, and this will be should be, at least the little parts now should be you could sand with confidence knowing this is not turning into chewing gum as you sand. You know what helps a whole lot here too? I just thought of this too. What helps? We had the heat up in the house last night to the moon, and these were all over by the drying vent, so that probably was one of the big helps. Just to give you a little idea about how much time I'm spending to take this off. Of course, we're going to spend a lot of time by the open bays. That's how quick that should come off. Should come off relatively quickly. And I can see from this we still have a few low spots. It's definitely going to need a second coat. Alright, so I'll do the rest of this. I'll block sand this off camera. And good idea too every once in a while to wipe the residue off the back, because if you leave it on there for a long time it'll cake on. Do one spot maybe this far down on each edge. And a trick with all sanding a silver, I don't even know if I've mentioned this, is get it plenty wet. Sand a little spot out that you want. Now sooner or later you're going to feel it start to drag down. It starts to, you lose the lubrication and it starts to drag down as it dries out. As soon as you feel it, now I could feel this right now starting to drag down. Get rid of this and get some clean M600 on there. And that's what allows you to sand the whole plane out relatively quickly. If you don't do that, it just seems to take forever. Once it starts to drag down, that's your indication. Now here it's starting to get harder and harder to sand. Don't press any harder. Get rid of that garbage. I'm trying to do as much of this as I can with a block, of obviously to give me nice flat facets in the finish. It is about what it looks like right now. You can see right here is a low spot. That's from a hinge pocket, by the way. You can see we've left the silver down in the little valleys. We're going to radius all the edges. This is a low spot. This will all get filled in. Now up on the hinges, you can see that still has to be done. We have to get each one of these edges individually and get in here with a little machinist ruler. But that's just an idea of that's about the right amount of silver to leave on. If you sand more off, it kind of defeats the purpose. Then none of it acts as filler, and you're going to be back down to having dry spots. This is just about right, and if you do it all with a block, see, here's one of those things where the sandpaper picked up a little ball and made a mess of the wood. Well, it's all filled in now. I got the little machinist ruler for doing each one of the individual hinge pockets. All little details. Every time you add a little detail to the plane, it gets, in my mind anyway, further and further up the rows. Keep it lubricated. The idea of the machinist ruler is so you have nice 90-degree angles. And plenty of M600. The secret is don't let it get dry. Don't let it get to the end of sanding and you run out of M600 and it's starting to get hard to sand. As long as you keep it good and wet, the sanding thing goes relatively smooth, relatively easy. Plus, a side benefit is you'll have nice big biceps like Arnold Schwarzenegger. At the end of finishing one of these planes, you'll look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Your wife will be so impressed. Your girlfriend will be impressed. Now also, all the little edges in between the hinge pockets, real convenient to do it with the machinist ruler. You get a nice little detail sanding on each one. As soon as it starts to get dry, as soon as it gets dry, wipe that crud off and get some fresh M600 up there. Now closing in on having the first flap done here. And I noticed all where my hinge pockets are, I have low spots. So I'm just really trying to work that block in there and get them flattened out to minimize it so I won't need 10 more coats of silver on this. I'm hoping I'm going to be able to get away with one more coat of silver. Now the last thing, as always, on all of these parts, the last thing, always want to do on this, radius all the edges. Because if you don't radius it right up to the last minute, when you get the last coat of paint on, there's going to be a razor edge there. And that's a part of the plane, every time you wipe it off, takes a real beating, so it's a good idea to even get some extra paint on there. All of the little edges. Now you can see what happens to the rag from wiping all this garbage off. You really want to get this stuff off. You don't want to let it stay on any longer than it has to. Get it off. Alright, one flap is finished. We'll do the other one off camera, and then we'll start on the wing. Well, with all our test parts complete, I'm guessing we're just going to run over. I'm not even going to try to spray this. I want to go see if the wing can be sanded out. Maybe we can even get the extra coat of silver on this in the next day or so. Anyway, you can see what happens is you see the blanket gets ruined. That's why we put the pad on a table. And of course you get this mess. Just get rid of it. Constantly rotate the paper towels. And I guess to do this amount of stuff we use this amount of M600, maybe a third of a bottle. But it's not a contest to see who can use the least amount of material or spend the least amount of sandpaper or whatever. The contest is to see who can get in the front row anyway. And be there with Borelli and Lampione and all these other hot rods. Okay, good enough. Gonna go get the wing and start working on it here. I'll have some coffee and then go work on the wing. Now I'm hoping the wing is going to be dry enough. What I'll do is I'll test one silk span bay. Now as soon as I see the edges of the cap strips and the edges of where the sheeting ends and the tissue comes up, I really have to cool it there until I find out just how much, and of course how much material is on here. Needless to say, I'm doing the bottom first. So if I have to make a patch or I go through, and sometimes you do when you get a little aggressive, but if I can show just doing one open bay here, try to keep the stuff off it. Get that silver crap off as soon as possible. Now it's difficult. What's difficult is to get right into the corners and edges. Now you'll see the little threads of the tissue come up through the silver. Then you know you're pretty much at the point where, well, you could sand a little bit more, but that's it. Now you see the edges of the cap strips come up, and you know, hey, that's about all you're going to do here. You don't want to go any further than that. Maybe one more little swipe down here. Now, there's a lot of different techniques. One of them, I'm just going to try and by hand to get over the cap strip edge, get around this edge. Now when you do the wooden part, you can use a block and go right up to the tissue, because the tissue generally won't be higher than the wood around it. But this technique works pretty well. And you can see, just get an idea of how much time I'm spending on each bay. And then multiply that times how many ribs there are on both sides, and you can figure out you have a couple hours of just sanding tissue here. But is it worth it when you put the plane out in the sun? And if you enjoy the look of a classic wood airplane instead of a foamy, hey. But please keep in mind the golden rule in this event. There is room in the event for everybody. Don't take that one-sided view that there's only room for whatever you're doing and everybody else is crazy. Room for everybody. Spitfires, Atamuscos, Windies, whatever. Now here's that bay that we just sanded. You notice, as soon as I see these edges coming through, and they're all high spots, whoop, that bay is now sanded. Now what I'll do, I'll sand the other ones off camera. I don't want to turn this into a 2-hour thing. Just repeat it over and over and over and over. Get all the bays sanded, and then I can start working on the wood. Now here's some trailing edge that I already sanded. And what I did, I sanded the trailing edge with a block and then just worked the block up into the corners. Just work it right up into the corners, because I want to get this blend where it comes from a cap strip to the trailing edge real fussy. See, there's no silver there. As soon as I get down to that color, whoop, then I know that's it. Here's a little silver right in the corner. I'll do all the wood spots now with a block and all the open bays by hand. Now what you want to try to do is get up in each corner. See, I'm just getting up in each corner. Okay, you can see how I've tried to connect all the cap strips in real nice here. You see these little dark spots? That's a spot where we've actually gone through to finish, and that needs to have an extra coat. That's just sanded through, in other words. Alright, we only got so much done here today. This is kind of the end of this session. Jimmy's coming over to work on his plane. But one of the things I did, and I wanted to mention it on the video, some of these little dark spots that we had, I showed them up close, and I got a bad spot up here. I just brushed on a little more filler. Just give it a little brush with a little bit of filler. I'll let that sit, and when we get back to work, we'll probably get back to working on this tomorrow, but we did get half a panel sanded. I got all the cap strips on this one panel nice and smooth. And except for those spots that I sanded through, I guess we're one panel into this now.
But I'm not going to go this deep on it. We'll see how the fuse used to make a fuse.
Now tell Borelli right on the video what you're doing to his plane here. Look at this, Jimmy. He's taking and making a Misty out of a cardinal. Look at his plagiarism. Look.
Oh, this is triple plagiarism.
You know, this looks like Mr. Potato Head. Mr. Cardinal. Well, we'll put the Jewish nose with the Arab eyes. Come on. It is bullshit. Look at what he's doing. Look at my plane. It took me 20 years to develop. Look at this car.
I've improved this plane.
He's putting Hunt's rudder on my plane. Get
We're
that
ready for
over
the
there.
circumcision. Here you go.
Oh my
This
God!
rudder could go either
Show me
way.
what you're doing, Mr. Potato Head. Look at this. I don't believe you're doing this to my plane.
What do you mean?
And what's the other one? Whiteley's plane?
This is Whiteley's.
Look at this guy stealing my design, stealing my nose construction. Holy man!
No, this is. I like the.
Oh.
I like the looks of this racer.
I like this. Let me see how you did that. Look at this. Check this out. This is my. Here's if you want a short nose woman on it.
No, it's the truth. This
You
is
want to
the
make a rocket ship? I mean, come on, Mike.
This is how we used to do model railroad track plans.
Oh,
you cut
my
them in quarters, and then you
My poor
expand
Cardinal.
or contract.
My poor Cardinal.
This is.
As
This
my
is
wing is
model
over there
railroad.
drying away.
Model
Look at
railroad
this guy. Jimmy's got his PM tail wing in. Oh my God, look at this. Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
It ain't even Monday.
Ain't even Monday, huh? Alright, all the insanity of yesterday is over. We got Jimmy's plane put together. Great. Mike got the plans finalized for his plane. We had a good time. Anyway, we're going to get back to doing just what we did yesterday. One by one, sand the silver bays out. Finish sanding the edges here. And then we'll flip it over. We still have to do the other side. Of course, I always do the bottom first. Detail this out. Get it ready for the next coat of silver. And I'll try to, as I go along with this, I'll try to, any little tips I can think of or things I can think of that'll make this easier. But sometimes just seeing what it looks like in silver or how you go about doing it, this is time consuming. This is, you know, a couple of days. It's almost impossible even for me to do this all in one day. I try to do, you know, one half one day and half the other day, because your hands get all irritated from all that M600 anyway. So we're just going to grind out the yardage here. We're like with a New York Giants football team. Hey, you can see some of those dry spots that are coming through here. We have a couple of them here. I'll just touch that up with a coat of filler as we go along before I even go on to sanding the rest. A couple little dry spots. All this is showing you is where the dry, here's some real bad ones here. But if you keep picking away at it, the whole deal is just, here's another one. Pick away at it. Another one out here. Just put a little drop of filler on top of that. Now we still have to, on this side of the wing, take care of that, all the open bays. And now because the filler dries so quickly, we can put a little bit on an ongoing basis. I like to get a little filler on here. And you'll notice when you put a little filler on these little dry spots, what will happen is you'll see little threads come popping up, the threads from the silk span. And while we're doing the open bays, this can be drying, and then the last thing is we'll detail out the whole bottom of the wing in one shot here. And the other spots? But anyway, as you see them, it's those little black dots. That's spots where you've already gone through into the tissue. And what's happened is, some of that M600 with the silver dust on it turns the raw silk span black. That's why it looks like that. If you look at it under a macro lens or a microscope, you'll see you've hit the tissue and the tissue turns black from the dust and the silver. Now those little spots on the trailing edge that we showed yesterday, that filler is already dry. We just take a block, some 320, and just dust it off, so that when we put the next coat of silver on, we're not going over that raw. It was up on the leading edge here too. You just need to touch it. You don't need to even sand hard here. Just touch it. And if it needs a second coat, give it a second coat. These have gone. They're disappeared. They're gone. Always get the radiuses again on all the corners. And of course, any little spot, use your hand. Whenever you feel a little spot, usually you can get rid of it right away. Now I may as well get the rest of these bays just dressed off camera. Just like to get at least one of them on here. Just carefully get in a corner. Most important thing is just don't go through. And you can bet before this is finished, we'll find a way of going through. Dress each cap strip at this point in time just a little bit. Watch the edges so you don't go through on the edges. Alright, well, I guess we'll get the rest of these done off camera. Now we reached another little watershed here. Have the whole bottom done. Bottom's actually ready to respray here. Just have to sand out the tissue areas on the top and then go around and touch everything up real carefully. Any little spots that we've gone through. You notice what we do, we leave the brush right in the paint so that we can go back. As soon as we see a little spot where we've gone through, get right up and touch it right up. I'm going to have some gonna have another cup of coffee here. I've been going through coffee like water. But I want to get this, hopefully even today, get another coat of silver on here so that this can be drying, and we'll get the second coat sanded out.
We're going to throw in the 1995 entertainment book with a ton of 2-for-1 discounts.
Well, I got half done, and right about now, believe me, your arms are starting to feel like rubber bands or something here. So I'm just going to take a little break before I get out and do that other panel. And we're going to get some silver on this today. Alright, I'm going to get ready to spray this guy. I went around here and detailed out most of these little spots where the cap strips miss. Try to get all these edges nice and smooth, especially the leading edge. Spent a lot of time getting all the filler off around here. Try to get those joints to disappear. And I guess the next thing is get another coat of silver on everything. Maybe get it aside to dry, and anyway, it's not going to happen unless we do it. Just got to get motivated here. It's cold outside. Now, as always, after a day of spraying silver, I kind of make sure everything is jigged up sitting here. Everything's drying up. And we're going to pack it in for the night. Boy, it's a good feeling to know that got that silver on today. Really am tired, though. This has been a long day. All right, see you tomorrow for some more sanding. I just want to show some of the things I'm looking for on this next sand out. See, there's some little kind of glitchy. This is where the guns spit. There's a couple of dry spots here. I want to go through this real carefully. These little spots will all come out in the next coat. So what I'll do is give this a, here's another spot right here, you can see. Give this another sanding out, wet sanding. Yes, look at the other side. The other side, if it's okay, I'll only sand one side. The sides that are now, from this point on, we're only going to bother doing more or less a touch-up. Although this side has so many little glitches, I'll sand the whole side out. Until we get the whole flap, wing, tail, see some little corners here need to be touched up. But being fussy right now, an hour you spend now is equal to 2 or 3 hours later on in the when you have color and tape and everything. Here's another spot up here. Anyway, we'll get this sanded out off camera and get another coat on here. Now we're basically going to do the same thing on the wing. We're going to go around little by little. You see there's some dry spots up in front. Anywhere there's a dry spot, we're just going to wet sand it off and try to get on another coat of silver. And it's just a question now of going back and forth until we get, until the whole wing looks like it was milled out of a block of aluminum. Now a lot of times when you have a lot of little spots on one area to touch up, it's just easier to sand the whole surface out. And because this coat is relatively smooth, you can see it comes off real quick. It comes off a lot quicker than you think. In a matter of 2 or 3 minutes, you can get a whole flap back down to, you know, where it's ready to be resprayed. The whole key here is let the silver dry as long as necessary. Keep it good and wet. And keep all the residue wiped off. Every time you sand this, it'll get easier and easier to sand it out, and to the point where the last coat, just should be a piece of cake to get sanded out. Now, it doesn't pay to go back down to filler coat. We have just enough here. This is almost ready. Well, it is ready to spray. Another thing too, you can find all the little details. Any little detail that has a little glitch in it. Here we have a little glitch up here. And just be fussy. Go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. This bad spot's kind of sanded right out. All right, I'm going to go run over and see if I can get some more silver on this, let this dry up. If it still needs another one, we'll give it another one. But this looks like this will probably be the last one, we hope anyway. Now, just like the flap, this coat of silver is sanded out just beautifully. Each time you sand it out, it's going to go quicker and quicker, smoother and smoother. And I'll do most of this off camera and get another coat of silver on here. And I think we'll be closing in on having this pretty much the way we like it. You can see this stuff's just coming right off. Beautiful, beautiful. Really coming off nice. Of course, a lot of the time you save is that on this coat you sure don't need a block to sand it. You can sand it by hand. Everything is so smooth. You know what's nice here is even the open bays are sanding out real nice. Really not having a lot of problem sanding out the open bays here. This will make this go relatively fast. Problem is, we only have a short session going here. I don't think I'm going to get time to spray this silver on, even if I get this done. But the longer you let it dry, the easier it'll sand out. And if you can do one bay every 2 or 3 minutes, bingo. It's amazing how nice this is sanding out. Each coat you sand is going to get nicer and nicer, easier and easier. Of course, your hands are going to get tighter and tighter too. But in the meantime, just grinding out the yardage. Okay, that's what she looks like with the whole bottom sanded out. Tomorrow I'll get down here, try to get down. Get the top sanded out. You can see there's a lot of little spots on the top that need attention. Anyway, enough is enough is enough. You can't do this all in one sitting. Even I can't do it in one sitting. So just do as much as we can, and it's time. And it's time right now. Now today I just filled up the M600 here. I say yesterday I did the bottom of this. Today I'm going to do the top, and I really want to now because I've let the top dry the extra day, this should sand out really nice, and I really want to. This is going to be very more time consuming than the bottom. The bottom is done. I really want to get the top of this perfect. The idea is that I don't want to have to sand this out. I want this to be the last time and the last coat of silver, if I can help it anyway. But now, the point is, even if there are little ginches and little mistakes in this, then I'll only have to touch up little spots. You can see there's a couple of spots, dry spots. They just feel like sandpaper. Anyway, if I can get that done today, and I can put this aside to dry, we will only be a day or two away from, hopefully assembling the plane. And I can maybe spend some time working on those Joe Adamusco exhaust stacks and take another look around at all the silver stuff. Before you put the wing in the body, even though this is very time consuming, when this is in the body and it's done, then all you have to be concerned with is sanding out the fuselage, and boy, that you just sleep a lot better at night knowing that. So I'm going to really go one panel at a time, one area at a time, until I'm just very satisfied with the way that is. Now I'm hoping, hope above hope, going to get the open bays done after a little coffee break. I'm hoping this is going to be the last coat, but you never know. I see a couple of dry spots, and if there is, as I said before, I just have to go back in there. Mr. Alcoa, Mr. Aluminum here. But before this day ends, I want to have this wing. Yeah, by the way, if you're just doing a little touch-up spot, you can usually wait about an hour after the silver dries and just carefully touch it up. 600 and M600 and just shoot that little area. But before we end this day, I want to have this wing in silver. That's my goal. One more panel to go. Man alive. Oh, God. I am really getting sick of sand and silver. Anyway, I really hope, you know, one of the things I hope is you can pick up, just by seeing what this looks like, you can pick up some of the techniques that I've used in my building, or whatever you want to call this, construction, development. Everybody's got a different word for whatever it is that they do. This is the one way I've found to finish a plane that it comes out light, it isn't too heavy, it's durable, it's pretty, buffable, repairable, not too heavy in terms of using any of the epoxy paints or anything. And we've reached, you know, every time I get to this, I get to another little watershed. I'm going to take a half-hour break and then get on with this outboard panel, but the purpose here, if you can pick up some of the little tips, even just by watching and getting an idea what this looks like, what does this tissue look like? This is what it looks like when it's sanded. This is perfectly smooth. If you can pick up some of these little tips, we've got a couple spots, I hate to say it, but we may have to go back over and touch this up. Any dry spots, any little fuzzy hairs, wet sand them out with 600. There's some spots up here that are going to come through right here. This is going to come through. I'm going to have to go back and touch that up. But still, not the end of the world. Not the end of the world. If you get to see what this looks like and you see it firsthand, here's the ones that aren't sanded. You can feel how rough they are. Here's the ones that are sanded. You can't even hear anything. Once you see this, once you do it, I think you're well on the way to being in the front row, being a concourse winner, beating the pants off of me at the next appearance judging anyway. We'll do the other one off camera and then get back here and get this guy sprayed up, hopefully before the day's over. Now what I'm going to try to do before I actually spray this last coat of silver, she's all sanded out. All of those little dry spots that I'm finding, I'm going to put a coat of very thin filler. Now I haven't shaken the filler up. I'm just scooping off the top of the unshaken filler here in an attempt to try to, well, what I'm going to try to do is avoid having to patch this too much. Now another thing too, and I'm going to show this on a macro lens, any of the spots on the cap strips and that look kind of dry, you can go through and be real selective. Right up here we got a spot. Let me show some of this on a macro lens. This may be a good thing to have on a macro lens. Now you can see the spots where I touch this up, it's kind of thin. I'm also looking around for any edge, and I had one down here. See right here where I could see the threads of the silk, see right here, the threads of the silk span coming through, they come through black because the silver dust in the M600 in it. Just run a little bit of filler across that. We're going to touch this up. I'll let this dry off camera. Give it an hour or so to dry and then come back. Sand it out with 600 and then spray the silver. This should be ready. But if you get this idea of an ongoing touch-up, boy, save you a lot of work. Now it's D-Day time here, and what I did, of course, I take the wing, all of the hinges, you can see all the hinges are up here, all of the little hatches and covers, flaps, everything. The only thing left is the last coat of silver. Okay, and what I want to do, before I put that last coat of silver on, I want to get a reading on where we are. And that balanced out at 399 and a half, let's call it 400. 400 grams is about 14.3 ounces for this wing. In silver, that's a good enough weight. It's not the lightest one I've ever made. And certainly anything up to 18 would be fine. But what this tells me now, the reason I did this, what this tells me now is I can put a nice healthy coat of silver on here. I don't have to really make myself crazy trying to put, the lightest coat possible. I'm really going to try to get a nice wet, shiny coat of silver on here. Now, if this wing was 450 or 500, I think I'd be calling somebody up and asking them if they want to buy a wing. Anyway, this is a good weight, not a great weight. I've had them as light as 12 and a half. This is a little heavier, and I've had them as heavy as 18. In fact, this guy here, the green guy, was 18, and Tradition was 18. So we're on the light side anyway. Tsunami was just over 13, so we're an ounce heavier than Tsunami and a little lighter than the green guy. Anyway, this lets us know we can go right ahead now and spray a real nice coat of silver on here. Now, there's one thing I wanted to mention on the video, because there's a misunderstanding here. A lot of people, when they weigh a wing, they don't take into account how much the tip weight box already weighs. Now, what you would have to do, you see, I made the calculation out here. This is the weight of the wing. It's 14.28. Okay. But one thing I didn't take into account here, obviously I didn't take into account the weight of the silver, which will probably be about 10-15 grams when I'm done. The one thing I didn't take into account is the weight of the tip box, and what you have to do if you want to take that into account is balance the wing on 2 razor blades or on 2 knives or a piece of balsa wood somehow. Put a grain scale under the outboard tip. Now what that does is you deduct the weight that's already in the outboard tip because you have weight, the tip weight box and everything. If there's extra weight out there, now two things can happen. If there's extra weight out at the tip already, you deduct that off the total weight of the wing. In other words, if the grain scale read 15 grams out there, well, we deduct that off the total weight of the wing because that's going to count as tip weight. If, on the other hand, the inboard tip is heavier, if you've made a real heavy tip weight guide and not hollowed out the tip, you add that to the weight of the wing. Now, I haven't done that on this yet. I'll do that later on off camera just to give myself a, it's a time-consuming thing to do that. But right now, be aware that even though this is a 14.2 wing, it might be that I have a ½ ounce of tip weight, or that I go in the negative direction, that I need a ½ ounce to compensate for this heavy tip, in which case then the true weight of the wing can be adjusted. And it's usually never more than ¼ ounce, so you can do it with a grain scale, balance it in the middle here, but that gives you the true weight, and it's the true weight. You know, for instance, if you made this wing and you made the tip weight box out of 64th balsa, well, sure, you'd have a lighter wing, and when you went to balance it, you'd need an extra ounce of weight for trim adjustment. So what the hell would be the point? Anyway, I just feel on a PM size wing, this size wing, any weight from anything less than about 13 ounces is going to be unrealistic. In fact, Tsunami did have a bending wing there at times, and we were afraid it was going to fold. And anything more than about 18, you really ought to consider shaving off some paint, or you should consider making the flaps a ¼ inch longer across the whole span, one or the other. Okay, we're going to go get some silver on this, and then we'll get a final weight and a final balance. There's the wing, dry out. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, free at last. That looks like it's going to do it on the silver. That looks like, and there are 1 or 2 cap strips I need to touch up. I'm definitely going to do that off camera. By the time we get to another videotape, we'll be ready to start assembling the model. I'm really looking forward to this, believe me. Anyway, it's Christmas time. It's almost Christmas, and we're doing some Christmas decorations around here, and boy, I'll tell you, Christmas comes, it seems like it was just 2 weeks ago. It was Christmas before. Now, as always, I hope everybody got some tips, some usable information, something you can put into your own building and flying program here for the future. Christmas comes but once a year. Boy, oh boy, I'm telling you. And I've said it I said it before. Just seems like it was yesterday, that it was last Christmas. We were working on Tsunami. Every year it seems like we have a different, I don't know, different agenda going here, whatever. We're decorating the house as we speak. Going to have our annual stunt party at the house. Looking forward to seeing all our friends, and needless to say, that's one of the very special things within this hobby, is just having that special group of friends. And if you've been watching this video, watching this plane being built, obviously you're one of them. We hope to see you on the next video, and happy, merry, joyous, happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, all of that nonsense to all of my good friends. It's a special part of the hobby. And it's a funny thing, every plane here represents one year or part of a year of my life. I look back at them, the year of tsunami, good year, definitely a good year. The Red Baron, another good year. Tweener, maybe a good year, maybe not. The Green Plane, a lot of good memories, a lot of contest wins. Tradition, contest wins like you can't believe. He's just to pull it out in the bottom of the 9th special. The Cardinal Sin, yet to be proven, yet to be developed. That motor is going to go to Greenaway, that Stalker motor. The VMAX, going to live on in Brian Kiefer's hands. And the Sidewinder, probably one of the planes that'll live on forever in somebody else's Air Force. Anyway, Merry Christmas. I say this over and over, but I'm just we've been decorating the house and I'm just getting to be a crazy man about Christmas. Merry Christmas again. Just got to remind you about that polka concert. I haven't gotten my polka music yet. Maybe on the next video. Okay, see you on the next tape. Strega is going to become a one-piece airplane. Let's hope within the next video or so.